The 80s were a revolutionary time. Technology was innovating like never before, the Cold War was coming to an end, Hollywood was booming with action movies like Die Hard, and shoulder pads were in style for some reason. But there's plenty you don't know about this iconic decade. From a pizza mascot who created a hostage situation to the real origin of the Rubik's Cube, I'm Mike with List 25, and join me as I count down 25 fascinating facts about the 80s. 25. The Safety Dance. The Safety Dance was an instant classic when it hit the airwaves in 1982. On the surface, it's a fun, upbeat motivational song about wanting to dance. However, the lyrics have a very specific meaning. According to the song's writer, Ivan Doroschuk, it's all about bouncers, as in security guards at clubs and music venues. Ivan was sending a message to bouncers who had been stopping audience members from doing one dance in particular, known as pogoing. It basically consists of people jumping up and down erratically while throwing their limbs around, so you can see why it was a little alarming. It doesn't exactly sound like a safe dance, either. But you know what they say, you can dance if you want to, you can leave your friends behind, because your friends don't dance, and if they don't dance, well, they're no friends of mine. 24. Murder in Miami was out of control. While some were singing about dancing safely, others were fearing for their lives. One of the worst places to be during the 80s was Miami, where the murder rate was 25% higher than other major American cities. In the very first year of the decade, Miami became the murder capital of the country, with over 62 murders for each 100,000 residents, along with thousands of other violent crimes. Much of that was driven by the cocaine trade in the city, where cartels played out a violent drug war on the streets. Thankfully, a lot has changed over the years, and the police now declare that Miami is the safest it's ever been. 23. Daily shampooing became normalized. Believe it or not, before the 1970s, you wouldn't find shampoo in most people's homes. Synthetic versions had been created in the 30s, and traditional mixtures went back thousands of years, but for the modern American consumer, shampoo wasn't on the radar. That was until television ads funded by Breck Shampoo told the public that shampooing multiple times a week is good for your hair. Since then, the industry has exploded, with more brands than you can count, each offering vitamins, minerals, and a new formula. 22. 1 gigabit hard drive cost $40,000. These days, you can get a brand new computer for under $500, and usually they come packed with at least 200 gigs of storage. Now, transport yourself back to the 80s and imagine the price of just 1 gig being $40,000, which is equal to about $125,000 today. The drive itself, created by IBM, weighed almost 65 pounds, and it all fit into a cabinet that itself weighed 550 pounds. This wasn't exactly portable, and was instead mainly used for research purposes in universities and companies. So the next time you fit your laptop into your backpack, just be thankful that you don't have to push around the weight of a piano. 21. Cinco de Mayo became bigger in the US than in Mexico. Each year on May 5th, Americans around the country mark the date, often by drinking margaritas and tequila. But why is the holiday so important? Well, aside from being my grandmother's birthday, it comes from Mexico, when locals defeated the French army to protect their territory in 1862. That victory was rarely celebrated here in the US until the 1980s, and it's all thanks to a beer company. A campaign led by the Anheuser-Busch and Miller companies saw an opportunity to market the Mexican holiday as a festive time for drinking. They created a Hispanic marketing department and funded Cinco de Mayo events across the country. Decades later, it's safe to say that it worked. 20. Pablo Escobar spent thousands on rubber bands. The name Pablo Escobar is steeped in legend, and not for any good reasons. The drug lord amassed one of the largest illegal fortunes over decades of terror before he was taken out by authorities in 1993. At the height of his power, in the 80s, there was so much money coming in that $2,500 was spent every month on rubber bands. Adjusted for inflation, that's equal to about $90,000 a year. Whoever said office stationery wasn't big business. 19. The Noid shocked the country. An unlikely figure shot to popularity in the 80s, the mascot of Domino's Pizza, simply called the Noid. As part of a marketing campaign, the Noid was depicted as a cartoon pizza-stealing menace. To avoid the Noid, all you had to do was order from Domino's. It captured the public's imagination and worked wonders for the company's branding, until it led down a dark path to a real-life tragedy. A schizophrenic man burdened with the name Kenneth Lamar Noid took Domino's employees hostage after he came to believe that he was the Noid from TV. Ever since then, the character has been retired from advertising. 18. Rival ice cream truck drivers went to war in Glasgow. Ice cream trucks seem innocent enough. That is, unless you're around Glasgow during the 80s. Back then, gangs fitted ice cream trucks with stolen goods and illegal substances as a way of flying under the radar of police. For the most part, it worked, until there began to be a few trucks too many. Different gangs started fighting over different routes, smashing and robbing rival trucks, which escalated to murder. Police made a few arrests, and the ice cream wars eventually cooled down. 17. There was a New York gang called the Decepticons. In the mid-80s, Transformers were everywhere. TV series, movies, and kids' toys. But in New York, real-life Decepticons were terrorizing the streets. They named themselves after the Transformers villains and lived up to the name, carrying out robberies, mainly in Manhattan and Brooklyn. Some of the members moved into the music industry once they grew up, which is why you can find references to the gang in hip-hop, even from big names like Jay-Z. 16. Fish farts spooked the Swedish Navy. Deep below the waters surrounding Sweden in the 80s, the Navy's submarines were on guard for Soviet submarines. For 15 years, every time the Navy detected a signal, they would put the fleet on high alert before launching an investigation. However, each time, it seemed to be a false alarm. Eventually, a group of scientists were brought in to solve the case once and for all. What they discovered was that it wasn't submarines or a surprise attack. The culprit? A species of herring, which have a bladder connected to their anal duct, resulting in a very unique and very strong acoustic signal. In other words, the fish were farting. 15. Daycare hysteria. Kids have an active imagination, and usually that's a good thing. In this next case, though, it's almost led to innocent teachers going to prison. It all started in California when a parent of one of the children at the McMartin preschool claimed teachers had subjected her son to horrible acts involving animals, tunnels, and strange rituals. Hundreds of students were interviewed about the accusations, and investigators believe that as many as 360 kids could have been taken advantage of. While this was making worldwide news, the interviewing methods were criticized heavily. Eventually, after 3 years, 2 trials, and $15 million in taxpayers' money, all defendants were found not guilty, and it was revealed that the original accuser had paranoid schizophrenia. 14. Online banking was invented. How do you send money to friends? PayPal? Venmo? Cash App? Add me and send me some stuff if you want to. Back in 1980, though, none of this was possible. That's what made online banking such a revolution. It didn't involve the kind of apps we have on our smartphones today, but it was computerized, meaning you could access your funds through a home computer for the first time. Users could connect through dial-up internet. And for those too young to remember, dial-up uses a phone line to connect to the internet. Kids these days will never understand the pain of that high-pitched screeching and beeping. "13. There were fewer ads on cable. Up until the 80s, depending on your provider, it was likely your cable had very few or no ads. That was true even for big national channels like HBO, Showtime, and Nickelodeon. But that decade would be the time when all these freebies came to an end. It became a golden age of advertising, when big money met with big ad agencies, and commercials became more competitive, meaning funnier, more engaging, and more artistic. For example, Nike's iconic Just Do It campaign first aired in 1988. Unfortunately, it seems like they're only getting less creative as time goes on. What was your favorite commercial growing up? Let me know in the comments. Bonus points if you actually link it, so I can watch said commercial and join in the nostalgia with you. 12. Fake Cabbage Patch Kids were a problem for the FBI. Looking back at Cabbage Patch dolls, you might wonder who on earth would get so excited about these things. 40 years ago, they were so popular that a counterfeit Cabbage Patch operation caught the interest of the FBI. In 1984, federal agents raided 3 properties in New York and confiscated 20,000 fake dolls. With a market price of $20 each, the inventory was worth $400,000. Now, if you were a big fan of Cabbage Patch, go near Helen, Georgia. There is the Cabbage Patch Hospital. You can adopt them and everything. You can do a whole thing. It's actually really cool. It's right near Helen, Georgia. Trust me on that one. If you're not a Cabbage Patch fan, it's still really cool to go. I love Helen. Shout out to anyone watching from Helen. Let me know if you're watching from Helen. I love that little town. It's more of a village. It's not a city. 11. The invention of Chicken McNuggets. Few things are more iconic to McDonald's than their Chicken McNuggets. And you might be surprised to learn that the fast food chain only introduced them in 1981, starting with a handful of locations, and then rolling them out nationwide in '83. It was part of a campaign to promote chicken after the government told the public to eat more poultry and white meat. McDonald's even hired a top French chef to come up with the recipe. They aren't really associated with fine dining these days, but they are still one of the top selling items on the menu. 10. The oldest known emoticon is from 1982. When a computer scientist named Scott Bollin sent 3 symbols, he unintentionally wrote his name into the history books. A colon followed by a dash finished off with a closed parenthesis. Type that out, and the symbol will immediately look familiar. Scott had sent the first online smiley face, and it spread like wildfire, with others adding different emotions until the text-size images of emojis arrived. The rest is history, and now it's hard to imagine communicating without emojis. Someone turned me into an emoji. Let's make Mike emojis. Mike emojis. Hashtag Mike emojis. The Mike Emoji movie. Probably be better than the Emoji movie, that's for sure. 9. The first commercial cell phone weighed 2 pounds. How much does your phone weigh? Well, the newest iPhone weighs just 187 grams, which might sometimes make it hard to tell if it's in your pocket or not. If you had a Motorola Dynatac 8000X though, you would always notice it missing. Released in 1983 as the first cell phone available to the public, it came in at a whopping 2 pounds, earning it the nickname the Brick. With the giant antenna sticking out on top, it wasn't exactly discreet. And unless you were expecting a very important call, it wasn't very practical either. It had a talk time of just 30 minutes before the battery died. 8. Seatbelts were optional. Seatbelts feel like common sense these days. However, in the US, they've only been required by law since 1984. The law was first passed in New York after research showed how the system saved lives in an accident. That didn't mean it was popular, though. A poll found that the majority of Americans opposed the law at the time. Nearly 40 years later, people have changed their minds, with 86% supporting them. And data shows that you are much more likely to die in a car accident if you aren't strapped in. So buckle up. 7. The average home price was $100,000. Inflation and rapid rising house prices have made it very difficult to enter the housing market today. Back in 1985, though, the average house cost about $100,000, which was 6.5 years on the average wage. Today, the average house is about $500,000, almost 8.5 years the average wage. So it's not just Gen Z and us millennials complaining, prices really have gone up. 6. Rubik's Cube almost had a very different name. What's the name of that cube with 84 colored squares on it? Well, the Rubik's Cube, of course. But why is it named that? And how was it almost named something else? Both of those answers date back to 1974, when a Hungarian man developed a way to demonstrate 3D movements. As an architect, Ernő Rubik knew it was important to give his students a sense of movement within space. He originally called it Magic Cube, or Bíves Kocka in Hungarian. By the 80s though, a toy company had picked it up, renamed it to the Rubik's Cube after its creator, and made it into one of the best-selling toys of all time. 5. An ozone layer hole was discovered above Antarctica. Climate science is much better understood today, but it was 40 years ago that scientists made their first major breakthroughs in the field. They found that there was a massive hole in the ozone layer. The ozone layer is a tiny but crucial part of the atmosphere that shields us from the radiation of the sun. This hole, located above Antarctica, was caused by the pollution of chemicals like chlorine and bromine. The discovery led to international agreements to limit the amount of chemicals released into the environment, and the ozone layer has been slowly healing since. 4. Prozac goes on sale. In 1987, a drug called fluoxetine was approved by the FDA and hit the market as a treatment for depression. Sold under the brand name Prozac, it almost instantly made people feel more productive, more positive, and more confident, all with very few side effects. Prozac is a type of selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, which leaves more serotonin, the happy chemical, in the brain to regulate mood. It became one of the most popular antidepressants and prescription drugs of all time. 3. There was a major boycott of the 1980 Olympics. The Olympics are meant to be a moment for all countries to put aside political differences and come together in the spirit of healthy competition. However, at the 1980 Summer Olympics, politics was unavoidable. The Soviet Union had invaded Afghanistan just a year earlier, and as a way of sending the message, the US started a boycott, lobbying for other countries to join them. By the time the opening ceremony arrived in July, 66 countries were boycotting the Olympics. It may have been a blow to the economy and the political status of the Soviet Union, but the competition itself was a clean sweep, with the country winning 127 gold medals, more than 60% of them. 2. The US and the Vatican didn't have diplomatic relations for 117 years. Vatican City is the smallest country in the world, but as the home of the Pope and the headquarters of the Catholic Church, it has a special status. For 117 years, though, the US refused to meet with them. Why? It stemmed from legislation introduced in 1867, banning diplomatic relations, partially because of the separation of church and state, and partly because of the division between Roman Catholicism of the Vatican and Protestantism of the US. In 1984, President Ronald Reagan ended the ban and re-established ties, despite some of the controversy it stirred up. Since then, every US president has visited the Pope in Vatican City. 1. Waterbeds were once immensely popular. Finding a waterbed these days is pretty rare. They seem exciting and fun as a kid, but if you have to sleep on one every night with water swishing around, the novelty wears off pretty quickly. Once upon a time, though, water mattresses were extremely popular. During the 1980s, mattresses lined with vinyl and filled with water shot into the mainstream. At the height of their popularity, 1 in 5 beds sold in the US were waterbeds. Many of them were as secondary beds to accommodate guests, but no sooner had the craze swept the country that it died down again. By the 90s, chances of crashing on a waterbed at a friend's house were vanishingly small. So, what was your favorite thing about the 80s? Let me know in the comments below. And as always, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, click that notification bell so you don't miss out on any new content, and be sure to check out our social medias, including my personal ones, links in that description below. Now, the 90s were filled with plenty of other novelties to keep people entertained though. Whether you wanted to relive your younger years or learn about how things really used to be, then click on this link here to find 25 activities 90s kids enjoyed that are rare today. I was born in 1986, but technically grew up in the 90s because I was 4 when the 80s ended, so I'm a 90s kid. So this is my decade.